Good morning. Today is June 27th of the year 2000, and I'm about to interview Isadore Tadiello, who is generally known as Izzy, of East Canaan, as part of a continuing series with World War II veterans, sponsored by the Tri-Corners History Council. My name is Edward Nickerson, and the unseen man behind the camera is Ian McCunn, like me, also a veteran of the war. We are sitting in Mr. Tadiello's home in East Canaan, just a few yards from the Blackberry River, where he catches brook trout for supper when he feels like it. Mr. Tadiello, who founded Tadiello Electrical Contractors in 1960 and is generally known as Izzy, as I said, was in the Navy before this country got into the war, and he was at Pearl Harbor on the day the Japanese attacked. He survived the bombing, continued to serve in the Navy in the South Pacific Theater right through the Japanese surrender, and continued as a career Navy man and as a chief petty officer through to 1960, when he went into civilian life and started his electrical company. Now, these videotapes will be available to the interviewees and their families, and will also be publicly available for educational purposes. So I'd like to start out by saying, showing a picture of your ship.
Yes.
You tell me about that. That was tell me about a seaplane tender.
Well, a seaplane tender, and in fact, this was the first seaplane that was built for the purpose of tending seaplanes, PBYs preferably. We had our own trainer aboard ship, which was a single engine pontoon, I think it was an SNJ for training, but it was built for the purpose of tending seaplanes when the planes were dispersed from the major bases, say, and they were never transported on the ship. They would fly to whatever appointed place that we would be sent to. There we used to house their pilots and crews. We had the personnel that would repair the ships, the planes, and keep everything like they would aboard, you know, on shore if they were there ashore.
And I noticed that the ship had a huge, other photographs showed a huge derrick for hauling the ship, the planes.
We had 3 before Pearl, and I was going to show that to you, but during the attack that morning, one of the planes that we shot down, before it fell, it was a fire, and it went out maybe 1,000 yards or so and made a complete loop and came back and crashed into our ship. And that was the thing it crashed into, right into the crane. And they had to take and cut it out. It was so damaged. But that was on the boat deck with the other one, and we had 3 of them, so that the ones on the boat deck, they were kitty corner. Number 1 was used mostly for hauling in our boats. All our boats were on the boat deck, and they were stacked in the larger boats on the bottom, and then the motorboats on the top. And the number 2 would take the planes from out of the water sometime and bring them in onto the after deck of the ship, and there it would be griped down and repaired, whatever had to be done with it. And then the stern, right at the very stern, there was that one crane that used to do most of the work. It did a lot of work, and it did our fishing for us too.
All right, well, let's go back a little ways.
Yes.
And get you to Pearl Harbor. You joined the Navy in 1940. And you did your boot camp in
Newport, Rhode Island.
Newport, Rhode Island. And you were on the USS Curtis, which is the seaplane tender we're talking about, when it was commissioned.
Right.
So that makes
in November,
plank.
Plank, and it makes me a plank owner.
Plank owner.
And we put it in commission November the 15th, 1940.
Where was it commissioned?
In Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And you sailed right away out to Pearl Harbor?
Shortly after commissioning, oh boy, it took a good month to outfit the ship, loading by the carload of food stuff.
Sure.
And the different necessities of the ship was capable of carrying 1 million gallons of high-octane gas for the planes, and it was capable of carrying, I think, 2 million gallons of our own fuel. And it had all its carried all the armament that it was capable of carrying, not only for our own use, but also for the planes, like torpedoes and depth charges and stuff like that. And we went, soon after the commissioning and the fitting of it, we went out for our shakedown cruise. And that took place in the Caribbean and part of the islands like Puerto Rico and Guantanamo Bay,
sure,
Cuba, and Trinidad, and all the nice islands. And we were out there for about 3 months.
Because that's still peacetime.
Peacetime. Oh yeah, that was peacetime. We made also Bermuda, which was not usual for an American ship. The island was British, and but there was a hurricane due to strike, I think, in that particular time of the year, and we were told to go to the leeward side of the island to get some protection, and we anchored out there, and the only ones that got ashore was the captain and a couple of other officers, and I, because I was in the, I wasn't piloting the captain's gig, but at that time, but I was the stern hook, I believe, at that time. I started as bow hook, and we got to pole ourselves through the shoal and through the coral, and we got into the St. George, I think it was, for a couple hours.
That's great.
But then afterwards, we went from there to Rhode Island for our torpedoes, and then we left Newport and we came down to Philly, and we picked up our degaussing or testing our degaussing gear at the Hampton Roads, Virginia, and we then outfitted again, filled up, and in May of 41. May of 41, we left for Pearl. Through the Panama, and we went into San Diego, and from there we went out to Pearl. I think that was about June of 41.
Right. Now let's move to the morning of December 7th. As everybody knows, it was a Sunday morning.
Well, maybe particularly,
you were on duty.
I didn't even know what that we were mad at the Japanese, you know, in those days, and believe it or not, 3 weeks before Pearl, we were asked, evidently, to take 12 F-4F Grummons to Wake at Midway.
Oh, yes.
3 weeks before. And we had, those planes were put on deck wherever they could be put, and our gas was loaded full, and this is 3 weeks. And we cruised out there. At Wake, we had to wait 6 days before we could approach. There was no docks. Before we could even approach the pipe that came out so that you could transfer the fuel. They came out with barges, and they took 6 planes, 6 Grumman F-4F.
You loaded the crates right onto the barges. And they were taken away, and then as soon as we were able, we
took off and went to Midway. And in Midway, they still had no docks, but they had at least a cove, beautiful cove, and we were able to get in there. And there we did the same thing. We discharged the other half of the gas and the other six planes. And
back to Pearl.
And we came back to Pearl the day before.
So you were still on duty. You didn't have shore leave on that Sunday morning.
But it was very funny because they doubled the watch, which none of us cared for, especially knowing peacetime Navy.
Yeah.
And they dispersed ammunition, which was not uncommon because we used to have also target practice if we could. And they also had submarine watch. Now, they knew that something was, afoot. In fact, the morning that we pulled out of Pearl, there was two, and they were the first two PT boats that I ever saw. Of course, I never saw everything anyhow, the young as I was. And they escorted us out for I don't know how many miles. They had a fear that there might be some sub lurking out there.
That was on the trip to Wake.
Yeah, to Wake, 3 weeks before. Right. So we came back, and we came in that Saturday morning, and we came through the nets, and they closed the nets behind us, and they sounded all hands stand by to handle ammunition, and we secured all the ammunition as soon as you come in.
Now this was anti-aircraft ammunition?
Anti-aircraft, anything, mostly it was anti-aircraft.
Well, the armament of a seaplane tender would be mostly anti-aircraft.
Yeah, and everything else was down in the armory.
Yeah.
And so we secured everything, and I think about 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was on duty that weekend. Those that had the weekend off could go ashore. If they had relatives, they could stay the weekend. If they didn't have relatives in Honolulu, they could not stay overnight. So they would go Saturday, come back by 12 o'clock, go Sunday, come back by 12. But I had the duty that weekend, and I had the gig. I was in the gig. That was his private boat, and we took the skipper to Hospital Point. His wife was waiting for him there, and he commanded us to return to the ship and stand by for any duty that he was the executive officer, but I think he was a commander at that time, and for his duty. And so we went back, and we had nothing else to do and just read funny books. And
right. So
but that was Saturday, right?
Sunday
morning. Those that came back, and that was most of them. There were very few that had family or friends on the shore. Came back, and those that they had good time, they probably were asleep, and that was the only morning that reveille did not apply, and so they slept on. But I had the duty, and I says, hey, I used to get up and I'd dress up in my nice whites, and I went up for chow, early chow.
What time was this?
About 7 o'clock. And even before I may have been there. And then I went up topside after deck. We were waiting for church call. Sometimes there was services on board ship, and other times we would go to another ship. Or I would have to take officers to another ship. But that's how I was. I was out in the fantail when this thing, planes, I heard planes, but you make nothing of it because they're flying planes all the time. But as soon, and I still think, and I feel that the very first bomb that I made note of was in our planes over on the end of Fort Island, where our planes were all up on the ramp. They had taken them out of the water, and they slapped 2 wheels on the pontoon, and they just tow them right up on land, and the wings were all like this, interlocked.
So that would be, what, half a mile away or so?
Well, yeah, half a mile.
Yeah.
Yeah, just across the way.
And these were Navy planes?
These were all PBYs.
PBYs, sure.
See, the PBYs, I don't know where they housed the smaller Grummins. The aircraft carriers were out, thank God, and they had their planes aboard ship. So on Ford Island, I guess there was just a minimal number. On Hickam Field, that was on the mainland, just across out of the water, that's where they had the Army planes.
The Army planes.
And up at Schofield, they had their Army planes, and the other little airports around the island had their planes.
Let me inject one thing. Just for the non-experienced Navy people, a PBY is a Navy seaplane. As I remember, it has 2 engines.
Right.
And it was the main eyes of the Navy.
Exactly. It was a patrol plane, and I think average 125 miles an hour.
Real city duck.
But when they were close to the water, those fighters were very, very leery to go down that far, dive on them, to go down that far, because then they didn't have enough time to come out.
Yeah.
You see?
Sure.
So on the water, those PBYs did pretty good in the evasive, but and clouds. A lot of clouds would be good.
Let's go back to, what was it, about 8 o'clock Pearl Harbor time.
Right.
And you saw, heard a bomb. Yeah,
I heard. And I heard the bomb, and we were ready for our flag raising, and we were, it was so nice. And all at once, just like the earth moving and shaking, and looked up, and there was and I says, oh my God. The first thought was, oh my God, we're going to be called away. There's some emergency, an explosion has occurred. But I had not even gotten that in and out of my thought when there was explosions all over. And, you were looking, and you stood up. And you were, really shocked. You're in shock, more or less. You're wondering what's happening. You had no idea.
Yeah.
And all at once you hear these planes groaning, and they would come over that island, as you saw where we were. They'd come over to the battleships over that way, drop the bombs or the torpedo, and come over the island, empty-handed.
Yeah.
And when they come over the island, that first row there was the old Utah and the heavy cruiser, and there was not the Ogallala, but anyhow, there was 34 ships there. They were so close to the island that they didn't even get a chance to see them, coming up out of a bomb and run.
Yeah.
But they come out a little farther, and there we were, and they started to strafe us. Well, we had gotten the call. We had gotten on the loudspeaker, all hands, general quarters. Something is happening, and go to your stations. And of course, I came a little alive, and I started running down the after deck and through the hangar and up to my station, which was number 6 gun.
Anti-aircraft gun.
It was a 50 caliber machine gun, water cool. That's how old they were. Big round 50 caliber, and got up there, and there was nobody there. The hoist that would bring up the ammunition was up against the bulkhead, and I heard no noise over there. And here, being that we were on the port side, the shield was closed on the outside, but on the back it was open, just about like this. See, it was open, and here, this is what was my station. I got there was nothing. Across the way on the starboard side, where the other machine gun was, exactly across there, number 5. Hey, that shield was in a good place because the planes were out there, and it wasn't open like ours. So I ran across to find out what I should do. He said, stay here for now. But we still had no ammunition. And so finally it took about 10 minutes of that going crazy, staying down, because you could hear the shells, the little machine guns, ping, 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 ping all over the place. And you stayed down and you're shaking like crazy. And finally we heard and in between the planes, between the planes, I was a runner anyhow, because I was in the captain's gig, and they didn't give you a permanent gun station. I ran over, and I got there was two of us, I think, and we got the ammunition. They were in cases, round at the top, and went down and square, and you just hang them onto the gun on the side, and he ejects it a couple times, and it was ready to fire. And I think that gun at least shot down five of the, maybe other machine guns hit some of the other planes, but I'll tell you, it was in a good spot. We had the whole side of the ship. So finally my gun captain came up from number 6, and then I had to go across over there. I didn't like it at all. And then they knew that we were doing nothing over there, so they all said, assist everything to the starboard. And that was when the two-man submarine off to in the nice open water brought the conning tower up. It was in our after starboard quarter, and the number 3 gun, number 4 gun was back here on the boat deck. There was a 5-inch 38 and a 5-inch 38 over here. This 5-inch 38 put the sub on fire. The first one missed, went off somewhere, and the other one hit so close that it made the ship come up, because it was only I don't know, 1,000 yards, you know, and I think the concussion would be enough to do anything.
So the sub came right out of the water?
The bow came up, and so they couldn't fire the torpedo at us because they were headed right for us.
Yeah.
And at that point, a destroyer, and I forget the name of it, yes, came up the island. It was steaming like crazy and blowing its horns, and the black smoke coming up, and it came up and glanced on it, passed it, and dropped 2 depth charges, and that thing just came up out of the water like that, and it seemed like it was shriveling as it was in the air, and then plop, 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 and went down. And I think a couple days later they asked for another torpedo, another depth charge, because it was still bubbling and stuff like that. But they salvaged it later on during the following year.
So you were actually manning, were you actually firing the guns?
No. My gun captain was firing. Yeah. But there was nothing to fire at that side. Yeah. So we did go on the other side after. Yeah. The first attack was mostly on us machine gunning. Yeah. That's why we were able to knock down, we were credited with 7 planes and the 2-man sub.
That's
we were off to the side.
They didn't lose more than about 25 planes.
Exactly. We did very well because we were not bombed at that particular. They were dropping all the bombs on the major ships. Sure. And they were coming over and machine gunning us. That's all.
Just as kind of an afterthought.
Just as to do as much damage as possible.
As they could, yeah.
But then I would say about an hour later, or time was not an essence, because you were I don't know, in a semi. I remember everything, but we were kind of in the semi whirl. Yeah. And we waited, and we were getting all the scuttlebutt. The fleet was seen out there waiting to make a landing. Oh, we were getting everything.
All kinds of rumors.
Oh, rumors. And all at once, we heard planes again. And all
This was
hands,
the second wave, yeah.
the second wave came in, high altitude. They were fearful of us being more prepared.
Yeah.
And which we were. And our guns started to fire at them, but boy, they came diving down, and oh man, evidently the guys that were going back, and they said, fix that guy down there. That's out of the way a little bit. He's been molesting us.
Yeah.
And they came right down, and boy, they stuck 5 bombs to us, but only one hit. But it was enough. It was armor piercing.
That's the one that did the smash the crane.
No, that was a plane that crashed in there.
Oh, that's right. You told
me. A plane,
that's
yes.
Right, yeah.
That was after it was set afire. But this here was a bomb.
Yeah.
And the first bomb hit the buoy and so on. There was 1, 2, boom, 1, 2, you know?
Yeah.
Of the 5 bombs. And he, instead of coming in the length of the ship, he came in kind of at an angle. The ship was like this, and he came in like this, more or less. And he hit with 1. And it went down through the boat deck in carpenter shop, the repair, aviation repair, into the hangar, through inch deck, and as it went through, it went, whoa, and I mean, whoa, wow. The handling rooms that were feeding the 5-inch guns were up. You know, up on the ceiling up there, you might call ceiling, the bulkhead and the ceiling. You ought to see penetrated the powder room and damage down into the I don't know how it didn't go into the only thing is our aviation engine aviation gas tank was empty of the gas, and what they do is they pump water in, say. But our own fuel tanks were just after those, I believe, and they never hit them. We always thought that if they ever hit us, man, we'd go sky high with just our fuel.
Sure.
Today they don't have that high volatile stuff.
Yeah.
And but anyhow, we started. It struck, and I was about 100 feet from where the bomb went down in. I was, I think I was on 5, but it was forward, and it was just about, I would say about 30 feet from the crane that was hit, right down through, and I didn't even, you know, it was just a plunk, just like that plunk. But then the after explosion was what did all the damage. But we were called us guys that were extras were told to fight fire, and it slewed the engine oil, and that was all over the place, and it set everything afire. The after deck had a plane, our trainer, which was going to be used that morning for the officers getting their flight time in, was on the after deck, and I think those planes came in and set that afire too. And around 3 o'clock, we were told to stand by to abandon ship. The ship was laying right over, starting to go, and I remember our boat boom that was stuck out from the side of the ship where our boats used to tie up to. It was about 35 feet out of the water, and yet that end of that boom was almost touching the water, and they said stand by to abandon, and that was a shake-up. So finally it stopped, and it stopped listing, and all at once it started to come up and equal. Then it started going the other way. And again, around 5 o'clock, we were told to stand by to abandon ship. And then again, they saved it, and we sat there, and the boats that we had in the water had tar on them, and the oil and I had to go and pick up the skipper, and it was a disaster. It was a mess. That's all we were thinking about. Was the skipper ashore? The skipper was ashore, but the commander was acting skipper.
Sure.
And that was that Mr. Patterson that we were talking about before. Wonderful guy. And it really made a lot of young kids old fast, I'll tell you. Shake, my stomach shake for days, inside. And the worst part of it was, we had, after the abandoning ship was completely over, they brought us up sandwiches, and I forget, coffee to drink. And we were told we lost number 4 gun, the port 5-inch 38 from down below. So number 3 gun was still in action, and all the machine guns. And we were told that we might be invaded, and even though we can't do much, we'll do the best we can. We may be told to leave the ship and collect up in the island, go up into the islands, you know, and be as much a deterrent as we could be. But, and this all shook us up. We didn't know it from nothing. So we, that evening, to relieve some of the crews, they took some of the fellas and they put me over there on number 3 5-inch 38 caliber, and I didn't know which was which then. And that tub was completely around. Oh man, it was high. Almost, I couldn't hardly look over it. But and we were told that we would stand watch. We would stay there until 12 o'clock that night, and everything was calming down. We were kind of calming down some, and things were quiet. You could hear a shot here and a shot there sometime, you know, off in the distance. And we were sitting there, and all at once, at 11 o'clock, I was asked to put on the phones. And I says, what am I supposed to do? He says, that's all you're supposed to do, is the gun captain said, is relay what you hear to me. And I says, okay. And so we sat there, and there was nothing going on, and 5-10 minutes before I was to be relieved, we heard in the distance planes over Diamond Head. And gee, you could see these 3 sets of 2 little burners, you know, little like little flames coming out. That's dark, pitch dark, you know. And they said, do not be alarmed, friendly planes, you know, Enterprise and the Saratogas or whatever planes are coming in. Don't be alarmed, everything's okay. So I transferred the message, and all the fellows, they were all laying around, exhausted, not from work, but from, you know, just tension.
Yeah.
And they all stood up, and we were all looking at the planes, and they would come over Diamond Head, 3, you know, nice 3, and all at once they would start singling off, and they coming in for Fort Allen. Well, the first plane that come in evidently misjudged, or he was kind of worried, whatever, misjudged the approach, and so that he felt that he should take off and come in again. Well, he didn't even get down halfway down the airport. I'll tell you that the whole harbor, boom, you could, the tracers alone looked like the sky was full. We weren't firing, but because, man, I wouldn't know what to do anyhow, but sure. The sky was full from the island itself and from other ships around. And they said, don't fire, don't fire. And we said, I'm not firing, we're not firing. But that plane was set afire halfway out, and it kind of climbed a little bit and went over and crash landed in Pearl City, just over there, a little ways from where we were moored. And
was the pilot killed, do you know?
Oh, yeah, he was killed. And the other planes just came in, all of them came in good. Yeah. But then that was another thing. I was sitting up on the pointer seat. There's a pointer and a setter, and on either side of the gun. And I think the pointer does the up and down, and the setter this way, and the setting of the time of the shell. And I was sitting up there, and I had the phones on, and the cord was plugged in, and I looked around, and there was nobody. I said, what am I doing up here? And because at that point, you could hear all these planes in the sky, and you said, oh my God, they're doing it again to us, you know? And I jumped down off the mountain and underneath the gun. They were all underneath there. But the cord was keeping me from going any too far. So I just dropped the cord off, and I swooped in there, and I was shaking, and so help me, I was saying, this has got to be a war, and will I survive it? And shaking like oh, it was someday, I'll tell you. And thank God, I think youth, being young and stuff like that, you forget, and you weren't hurt. The only thing I got when I was fighting the fire after the bomb exploded, and the hoses were, oh, you ought to see how beautiful they flake, you know, so that when you grab them, they run off. Well, in our confusion, evidently, somebody kicked it and got it knotted or something there, caught on something. I grabbed the nozzle, and I was running, and that stopped. My feet went out on oil, and I landed on the deck and slid on my nice whites. Oh, I was oil from my head to my feet. But boom, I slapped up, you know, you didn't have time to say, oh, you hurt yourself. And you went back and you got it, and you walked over there, and then we kind of hosed everything down. I've got a piece of the parachute of one of the pilots that, you know, was in the plane.
One of the Japanese pilots?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Sure, that hit the crane.
Yeah. You
ought to see, we had to, respectfully speaking, we had to kind of clean them up, pick up all the human parts, yeah, and put them in a canvas container. I forget what we did.
That was
we
the
buried
plane that
it.
Actually hit you.
Oh yeah, that's the one that smashed. It was a good-sized plane. It had to have been a torpedo plane. Yeah. Because it had 2 men, yeah. And there was a full, not a colonel. What's the one below it? Major. Yeah. A leaf. What is that? Colonel?
Oak leaf. It would be a major or lieutenant colonel.
Yeah, okay. Anyhow, it was an oak leaf. I didn't get one of those. Oh man, everybody got something, you know, valuable. But I got a piece of his prayer book, one leaf of his prayer book that wasn't burnt, and the parachute, the part of the center, the red, you know, and I put that away for safekeeping. And then I found a piece of the shrapnel of the bomb that was aboard ship, and a few other things that a young guy would, you know, think about doing.
Well, let's move on. Okay. After Pearl Harbor, that's really exciting.
Otherwise, we're going.
I feel I lived half a year. In the next few weeks, what did you do?
Well,
you had to wait for your ship to be repaired.
Yep. And it wasn't repaired much. Thank God the engines were not affected. Our fuel capacity was not affected. The only thing that was affected was our gear locker and the patching up. You can't believe how an explosion of a bomb inside of a ship, you would think that it would blow everything out. No. The bulkheads were sucked right in, because when you burn, from what I was told, when you burn the oxygen from in an explosion, the pressure outside just sucks the bulkheads right in, between frames. You know, unbelievable. And this is half-inch steel, and just like a bubble, you know,
vacuum, yeah,
a vacuum, yeah, exactly. Right.
So how long was it before you went to sea?
By February the 4th.
42, yeah.
42, we was on our way to the Pacific. We went February the 9th of 42. We had our first shellback occasion. It was cut short many ways, but
that's for crossing the equator.
Equator. We were headed for Suva, Fiji, and New Caledonia. And we stayed there for, I think, 5 weeks in New Caledonia. And we were the first American ship in there, and we had, oh man, what liberty. We had a couple liberties after 3 weeks of quarantine, and our dollar got us 34 francs. Oh man, what you could do with all that. We emptied out the town fast. Anyhow, we came back to Pearl, and we outfitted the ship, and I think in another month, that's how fast everything was moving, we went right back to New Caledonia, and from there, after a couple weeks there, we picked up our 2 escorts, mine layers, and we went up to the New Hebrides, and we went into Espiritu Santos, that strait, and we were mined on both ends. And it was 14 months before we hauled that anchor up in that bay. Oh, that was a long haul.
14 months at sea.
14 months in that, yeah. Every
that area.
Yeah, every 8 days we used to get 4 hours, and we'd leave the ship and go ashore, and we didn't have no athletic gear locker. Everything was destroyed. That was it. We used to roll up a sweatshirt, a skivvy shirt, and roll it up and play football with it, or the baseball. I think we had a couple bats and a few balls, but nothing elaborate. And finally, in August of that year, when Tulagi and Guadalcanal was secured, it came in with the cargo ships. They started opening up the mine, and the cargo ships came in, and we had 2 cans of hot 2% beer every 8 days, and I would give mine away fast like, just as long as I could get ashore. But the President Coolidge, enormous, big, beautiful passenger liner, had a full complement of Marines, and they were coming in, and they were going to build an airport on the island and secure it good, since we were already advancing. That poor ship came in, and it was so big that, and the pilot was piloting it, but it hit one mine, and it was shoved over and hit another mine. It was just like tumbling, you know, and the more it was shoved over, I think it got hit with 2 or 3 mines. It steamed at full speed and hit the beach, where it was about 50 feet of beach and 180 foot of water, just like a shelf like that. And they were able to get, I think they had only 2 or 3 casualties actually where the mines exploded, but the rest they salvaged. And the guns, they carried on ashore as much as they could, but a lot of it was lost.
Did the ship stay afloat?
No, no. It just started to go off that shelf, you know. It started to take water on, and it started going, and then it slipped right off. And it went into 180 feet of water and laid to its port side. And I'm telling you, from a boat, it looked like you could take and step out of the boat and step onto the side of the ship. That's how clear that water was. But it was down at least 80, 90 feet, you know, the closest side. And we did, I went over there as a work crew to salvage whatever guns we could by sending down with a David and a diver, and they would rope on something and we'd haul it in, you know, and salvage as much as we could. But that was a big loss there. Not of life, thank God.
Did you, they took the Marines off in small boats?
No, no, I really, the small boats, whatever available.
Yeah,
they
whatever.
Some swam, some, they were right close to shore.
Sure, right.
The only thing is it wasn't like a beach, you
Right,
know,
sure.
a long running
Yeah.
beach, but it was just those islands, that's all they are, is just a bunch of coral.
Yeah.
And it was just like if you had cut down 180 feet of water. And it's just about 50 feet of all coral and, you know, and lava and whatever,
Sure.
sharp rocks.
Now tell me,
Then from there, we came back to the States in 1943, latter part of 43. They were so good, they gave us 15 days leave. And I took the train home from California to Little Connecticut, and 5 days on that train coming and 5 days going. I had 5 days in Winston with my family. It was something. But I enjoyed it quite a bit and went back, and I had to fix this nose. I got it clobbered a couple times, and they sent me up to Oak Knoll in Oakland for a repair job. And I came back to the ship, and out we went again to Pearl. We spent a while in Pearl, and we outfitted full, and we went to, the war had stopped at that point. I'm not bragging, so help me. The war after Tulagi and Guadalcanal was secured. It seemed like things came to a stop. We came back to the States. We got all cleaned up. We was in dry dock and all repainted, and it was beautiful, and out we went. And we went to Pearl, and the first thing we had is scuttlebutt. We know the Curtis leaving Pearl, and they're headed for Funafuti. And we know all about it. See, look at see the hummingbird out there? We know all about it, and we're going to fix the Curtis, because they had it in for us all the time,
Japanese
it seemed like.
Mercedes,
Yeah, yes. And
Axis.
so we got there to Funafuti, and that night, so help me, Pete Pascal Charlie, 12 o'clock at night, every night, came over, dropped its 10 bombs. From the whole war, even when we were in Saipan, every night, in New Hebrides, every night at 12 o'clock. So we went to Funafuti. That night it started. Our PBYs patrolling, and the B-24s hitting Tarawa.
Tarawa.
Couple, 3 weeks of that, and we went from Funafuti, we went to Apamama, which was an island just a short ways from Tarawa, and at that point, the island was being hit. The morning after it was hit, we took off and into Tarawa. We stayed there for the whole time that it took to secure it. And then we went to Enawita, and then to Kwajalein. From Kwajalein, we there were a month and a half, and they were building up a fleet of hundreds of ships. And we says, oh boy, something is going to happen. And we went from there, and at that point, it's funny how they transferred me as first-class boatswain. I had made first-class boatswain already, and I was put on the Seven Seas. It was a yacht, a beautiful Panamanian yacht that was taken over for R&R for the flyboys. And it was taken and brought to, we went to Tinian. Right into Tinian, I took I was acting chief, and both our ship and the yacht headed for Tinian. And we got over there, and we were hauling our own anti-submarine net, and then that was put around the ship. And we were there for the invasions of the complete invasions of Tinian, and then Saipan
yeah.
and Guam.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were there. Things happen. Oh man, stories I could tell you. The Japs used to come and climb up our chains that were out there anchored, and kill the guys that were sleeping on the deck. They didn't do that too often after we got, after they started it. They were sinking our PBYs out there, putting holes in the pontoons, swimming out there and swimming back to the island. We had to really, they were really fighters. And, I remember so many of those things even. There was not much liberty, and it was touch and go all the time. But, we were safe, we were fed, we were feeling, not like those poor guys that used to come aboard ship, the poor Marines. They were haggard and bearded and dirty, and they used to ask for a shower or for some fresh bread, Just anything, those poor guys suffered. And then, even after suffering, have to die that way. At least we, crying out loud, we used to say, hey, if we're going to get it, put it right here. Because, you lived a pretty good life.
Yeah.
You did. Although you shook some inside, as I made chief and all that. I was no different than any young kid. You could tell how chicken-hearted I was when I was chief.
This is the fruit of 20 years naval service. Maybe you could point out a few things.
Yes, this here plaque that's in the center was made by my son, David, who was in the Navy, and he sent for my records at the Bureau of Personnel, and with the records, he had this man make up this here, they have a special name for it, and I forget, but in it has all the stations that I had, all these little plaques. My grades all along until I made chief. These are the medals that I earned. The medals are down below. That one picture is my boot camp picture, and this is my chief. I made chief in 5 years. This is for passing the equator, or that Golden Dragon. That's going to the meridian, 90th meridian, and this is the Golden Dragon. I mean the dragon shellback. This is the service in the police department aboard ship. That's the ship. You see the ship right there now?
Yeah.
That's in a belt buckle. These pipes, I never had one when I was coxswain, 3rd class, because I was in the captain's gig. Yeah, but then
what are they?
These are the boatswain pipes that you pipe. You hear.
Right, sure. Yeah, right.
And this is when I made 2nd class, and that's when I made 1st class, and then this kind of gold one with the lanyard is when I made chief. And who did the knots? The knots that was done by the boatswain mate, and these are monkey fists that we used to throw from the ship to the dock, These are the monkey fist, and these are all different knots that we used to make. These are double bowlines, single bowline, your clove hitches, and your flower to put on an end of a stanchion, and then you flake the rest of the cord on there. And these are the running lights. Your green for your starboard and red for your port. These are all, of course, pulleys, and there are some that open. We used to call them snatch blocks.
Okay.
So yeah, and
let's take this away.
It's a nice little remembrance that I
think it's wonderful.
Yeah, that I used to have.
Where were you when the war ended?
Well, I had left the ship in 1945, came back, and I came to Seattle, and I got some leave, and I had a report.
Before the Japanese surrender.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And I was going to and I was sent to San Diego, Coronado, and they were teaching us to be, as the boatswain mate aboard, an AKA, which is transport. They needed personnel at that point to do a lot of transporting before the A-bomb in Japan, and so they were teaching as many of us as possible to, you know, man the ships. But as it worked out, the bomb exploded, and they gave me shore duty.
The atomic bomb, yeah.
Yeah, the atomic bomb. They gave me shore duty, and I went up to Port Hueneme, California, to do a lot of discharging. We would receive the personnel in from overseas. We processed them, and then we would send them. In fact, I came with one of the trains. It was the first and last time I had a whole cattle car full of these men that I'd have to muster at night and in the morning, and we would be sidetracked for hours, you know, with the regular trains that were en route. And finally we got back to Lido Beach, and I says, thank God, I got a couple days at home with my wife, and I says, hallelujah, and went back to California. After that was mostly done, I had the opportunity to serve for a year and a half, which would end my tour. A year and a half, a year and a quarter, to decommission the beautiful country club up in Ojai, California. You may have heard it in the golfing terms. There's a beautiful golfing situation up there in the mountains, about 40 miles north of Ventura. And went up there and decommissioned. The Navy had taken it over for RR, you know, for R&R, for their officers. Yeah, and they had built big places for target practice, for golfing. Naturally, they had that, and for different Jeep courses and the whole bit, and buildings for these officers, and we had to clean it right out again and make it just like it was before. Take the mountains down that, you know, they were using for target practice, and the big bulldozers would come in, and we would just more or less patrol and make sure everything was up and up, and that they didn't steal the everything.
Well, it's pretty good duty, though.
Oh.
It's a beautiful spot.
There was only one officer, myself, and 15 personnel. Oh, open gate. Ay, ay, ay. The skipper would come in, and he would say, the full captain from the base, he would come up and he says, Chief, you sure you're attached to this base? And he signed, I got a beautiful picture, he signed, autographed it for me. And he was the Captain Brim. You know, I always associated that with the movie. Remember that movie, Brim? That guy, anyhow, he was a hell of a nice guy. And the lieutenant, he lived in San Pedro with his family, and he was a qualified pilot. They took him as a lieutenant, and he used to say, hey, Chief, have you had enough time off for a while? I said, sure, why? He says, I'm going to go home. If I'm needed, I had to go to Port Hueneme. And whenever he was ready, he'd come back, and he said, well, now I'm here. He says, if you want to go.
Well, that's a good,
that was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I cherished the years that I was in, of course, being that I never had the opportunity for education. I had 8th grade grammar school education. I was certified to go to high school without entrance exam. The nuns taught us pretty good, man. They kept us in mind. And so I went to work. I was only 15. I just turned 14, but actually I was going on to 15, and I went up to the Brush Hills up here in Sheffield, where the Bacchettis used to live, and I stayed there until I was 16 years old, so that the turn officers wouldn't get me. I shouldn't brag about that. Then I went to work for a Mr. Culver in Colebrook, a farmer, for a year and a half, and worked like a man, $20 a month and found. And from there, I came down and I went to work when things started to move a little bit back in the 38, 39, to Tiffany and Pickett, where my father had worked for over 30 years. And I worked there for just a few months because I said, man, it's got to be something better than this, dear Lord.
And then you went in the Navy.
And I went, no, I didn't know. Son of a gun, I mean, I was so shy and I was so afraid of anything, you know. I was, you know, it's funny how you could do anything and yet you were shy. If you didn't know something, you know, you were really afraid of it. So one day Mom says, you know, she bought me a $20 car, a 1921 Nash. And she says, you know, you think you could get me to Waterbury with that? And I says, oh, sure, Mom. I'll just get a can of oil because it burnt more oil than it did gas. And I brought her down to Waterbury, and while she was doing what she wanted to, she was visiting some friends, I said, Mom, I think I'll go downtown, because just a little while before that, there was a man that lived on our street by the name of Johnny Nero. Ever ring a bell? Heavyweight champion of the Pacific. And he comes strutting home in that Navy, and somewhere, I think it was in the back of my mind, and I says, oh, do I have the guts to go over there? So I went down to the post office, and I looked in the door, and she was shaking, and I think it was a chief in there, and he says, what's the matter? And I says, I don't know, I don't think I should even be looking in here. He says, come on in. What the heck have you got to lose? He says, what are you thinking? I says, well, you know, I'd like to improve my station in life, and it's wishful thinking that I might, you know, be able to. And he says, well, what the heck? Take the exam. And I says, exam? What the hell? You know. I sat down, and the questions were, gee, things that you know, normal. You know, what you do, what you like to do, and would you like to do this? Would you like to see the world? And all those good little questions. And after a while, I was finished. He says, you finished already? I said, yeah, I think so. So he looked it over, and whether I passed or not, he says, hey, you did fine. And he says, how long has it been since you've had a physical? A physical? What's that? He says, well, there's no obligation. The doc is here if you'd like to take a physical. I says, well, if it don't hurt, I'll take it. I went in there, and the only question was that when I was 12, I had a mastoid operation after a term with pneumonia. And he says, your hearing is fine, he says, but it's a question whether the Navy, at peacetime, whether the Navy wants that responsibility. So he says, if it's okay, you'll hear from us.
And that's how you got in.
And I says, okay. No, I wasn't in then.
Yeah, but I mean,
it was months later.
Yeah.
And I was up there bucking wood with my father in the summer, this Saturday, and this green Plymouth pulls up, you know, the old Navy printing on the side of the car, and my father, in his little Italian, he says, well, what does he want? And I said, well, Dad, you know, I think he may want to know if I would like to go into the Navy. Oh, gee, I was the oldest, and I was helping him, you know. My brother Tony was 18 months younger. And he said, oh, no, no, he had the war, and, you know, he wasn't going to, oh, let me go in, oh, you don't know what you're getting into, the wars are terrible. And I said, what wars? I says, you know, it's Navy. I says, if I could get in there, I would send you money home. I was trying to, oh, boy. He had to sign 18 times for me. So
well,
finally he says, as long as it's not the Army, okay.
Now, we got you into the Navy, out of the Navy.
Yes.
As you look back, let's just talk about, I know you spent 15 years after the war in the Navy. We'll have to skip that. But as you look back, what was the big thing that you got out of those 5 years during World War II?
World II. Well,
what was it, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful to have survived the war, and to have, since I was not hurt, I think that I was grateful to have gained the experience. To gain the experience of, you know, being able to cope with things that come up that are not controllable, and to kind of, I would learn to know more or less whom, you know, would make a good buddy or a good person to be with, or someone that, you know, could be trusted. You know, it's so difficult in life. But I think all those little things were part of the learning game, you know? And it was always good.
You were on one ship for 4 years.
Almost 5 years.
And does that mean a lot to you?
Oh, it was a home. It was my first love. You know, you might say you never talk of any other ship as her. She was our, you know, our first love. And somehow all the fellows that served on it were also thought of, you know, your first friends. And I have one that I just saw a month ago, that Mr. Edward Softy. He lives about 3 hours drive north of us in Florida, and he met a girl from the little area next to us, and he came down and he came over to see us. Now, I remember him like a brother, because I think he bunked above me. We were in the same division, and he was in that number 4 handling room. But he had anticipated, or when the explosion happened and before the fire ignited the power in Pearl, he was crawling out through the hatchway, and it blew off one of the heel of his feet, and I don't know what else, the trauma that was terrible. But I remember him like, that very, very close, you know. And I have another buddy that's in Boca Raton. He came on after we went, after Pearl. He came on as an older gentleman, and he was with the aviation metalsmith workers, and he did welding, underwater welding, everything. Oh man, he's doing so well, but except for his health now, everything. We're getting old, yeah, I know. But that was what the big part that I got out of it, and I think that it's the best thing in the world for every boy and girl, if I had it to do, before they know really what they want, to serve in some capacity of the military, for the discipline, a little bit of discipline. It don't have to be a lot, a little bit, to learning how to live with one another. I'll tell you, it would be the greatest thing in the world. That's what Switzerland.
Good time to stop. Thank you.
You're welcome. Very, very much.